Hello, NJCAA family. I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to provide some very important information, lots of questions, concerns, comments, information desired around the current blanket waiver, what that means, what that looks like. With me here today, I've got Mr. Troy Tucker, who is the chair of the Eligibility Committee, Mr. Mick McDaniel, who's our board chair, Ms. Marcy Henry, who is the Senior Women's Administrator, and Ms. Wanda Bodie, our Director of Compliance and Eligibility. And really going to try to focus on understanding the why, the when, the what, and the how. And people just have to understand there is no right answer to all of this. I understand that. Most of you understand that. There is no right answer to this. But November 1st is forthcoming very quickly. That's when LOIs start. So we really had to make some decisions soon. Knowing the NCAA had already created a blanket waiver for fall and winter before we did, they had not on spring. So really looked at understanding all dynamics. What's critical to us is that you educate your student athletes, that you keep them understanding and engaged. The most important piece of this is this does not mean that your student athletes have to return to your college. In many cases, that may actually be a disservice to your student athletes, because if their year of eligibility carries them forward, they may actually be able to get a master's degree paid for at the next level or other advanced degrees. We're just not charging them a year of eligibility. What does that mean? Again, they can compete in any number of contests. We looked at what a percentage might be, for that notion. Do you play up to 50%, up to 60%, up to 70%? There was no real consensus around what a percentage looks like. When I talked to the NCAA and the NAIA, that was the one thing they said, we looked at that first, doesn't seem to work very well for a number of reasons. Again, no issues, but for us, really focusing on, looking at it wholeheartedly. And again, why now? November 1st is LOI signing date. And, how does it affect the student athletes in the pipeline? Well, we know without a doubt, juniors in high school and seniors in high school are going to have a tough road to hoe because they're being backlogged by both the four-year colleges and us. It's not a fault of ours. We're in the most difficult position of all, being in the middle of both the four-year and the high school. So we're going to talk about some of the understanding and appreciation and value for respecting those high school seniors and juniors, but knowing that they have the hardest path to get to where they're going. So as we get going here, I really want to open the floor up and what took place. And I'm going to have our board chair and our eligibility chair, Mr. McDaniel and Mr. Tucker, kind of lead us off and explain to the group what took place over the last month or so to get us to the point of where we had to make a decision at our board meeting last Thursday. Mr. Tucker, do you want to lead us off there?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Parker. So the Board of Regents was presented with 5 options at our meeting last week to vote on. These were presented ahead of time to the board members to take back to their regions to discuss. And those 5 options included the following: a blanket waiver for all student athletes this year for any amount of competition that they compete in during the 2021 academic year, and returning students were considered non-counters for LOI purposes. So that would have been fall, winter, and spring student athletes. Another option, a blanket waiver for, again, all student athletes for 2021, but then those students would have been considered counters for LOI purposes. Option 3, a blanket waiver for just fall and winter student athletes, and those students would have been considered non-counters. Option 4, a blanket waiver for fall and winter student athletes, and those student athletes considered counters. And then option 5 was no waiver at all, that we would play this year. Any amount of games you played in would be considered a year of participation.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Mr. McDaniel, can you give a little kind of perspective on how this took place at the board meeting, the discussion, and kind of how the votes kind of shaped out for this discussion?
Yeah, so in terms of process, I mean, we have a large board, and the reason that we do have a large board is we want to get perspectives from all around the country. We want to make sure that when we look at a policy like this, that is so large that we unearth any unintended consequences. So we really focused on having a good discussion and not just going right to the vote, as Mr. Tucker talked about, as far as the voting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we wanted to hear from as many people as wanted to share what their perspective was from their part of the country, and ultimately come back together to figure out what the best way is to serve our student athletes and our member schools. So we really did go through each of the five, and then after about 25, 30 minutes of discussion, came down to the idea that really we were looking at two different things. And it was if it's a full blanket for all sports, or if it was going to be only for fall and winter sports, and see how spring goes. And then also about counters versus non-counters. So really that ended up being our two choices. The votes were 21-14-1 for a full blanket waiver. And then the votes for the non-counter was 22-10-4. And the reason we really wanted to hear the discussion was that we did have several members that were split within their region. They weren't quite sure which way to go. So we wanted them to hear why some regions were in favor of one way to proceed and some were in favor of another. So we did really get to, I think, the best possible result for our student athletes. And it's really thanks to the conversations that we had on that meeting.
Thank you, sir. So Ms. Henry, Marcy, you had heard a lot of feedback and conversation on how the play out between fall and winter and then adding spring, makes an impact. Again, we know that spring athletes got a year of eligibility back last year. We also know that a majority of the country never got to play a game. Florida, Arizona, some of the southern states got in a significant number of games, but they weren't counting the year of eligibility, where the Northeast, some of the Midwest, higher Northeast never even got a game under the belt. So it was a non-participation year as normal. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about some of the discussions and thought process of, what that looked like for, how it affects spring student athletes, since everybody's starting January 4th as a kind of a kickoff?
Sure. The first part, well, as you just mentioned, all of our sports seasons are primarily in the spring, with the majority of them starting in January. So that was part of the discussion. If COVID was going to affect our other sports during that season, then it would certainly also affect our spring sports as well. Maybe an argument against not including spring that was discussed was that the spring seasons are the same length as they typically have been, where the other sports have shortened seasons. In the end, I believe it was a COVID decision, and it was COVID that drove the final vote to including the spring sports in the blanket waiver, because they all are occurring in the spring, and it could very well affect our baseball and softball and other sports just as much as it can affect our traditionally fall and winter sports in the spring.
Thank you, ma'am. Mick, anything you want to add to that dialogue, some of the conversation that took place?
No, that's exactly right. And I think that a lot of discussion before our meeting last week was based on, the let's wait and see. But if we've learned anything is we know that things are going to change, and we've reacted to so many things since last March. And we just felt that overall our association is the association. And as Marcy just said, with everything going on during the same timeline, this really was a COVID decision, and it was not a sport by sport or season by season.
Yeah. Troy, anything to add there from eligibility seat?
No, I agree. And, I think there was some good discussion, and Marcy and Mick both mentioned it, that, regarding the fact that spring at least was not getting hit with the reduction in games. But when we really looked at it and listened to the full membership, I think it was a good choice on going to the full blanket just to accommodate all of our student athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard lots of feedback and information across the board around different options and opportunities, and it was critical, to kind of hear all of that and listen intently to what's best. Again, from a philosophical view, I think everybody agreed that fall and winter were a must, but going ahead and moving spring in because of the reasons that Marcy discussed was kind of critical. But as we kind of move forward in these conversations, the counters and non-counters become a big question. Concerns about scholarships, LOIs, how those numbers work. Again, November 1st is creeping up pretty quickly. And Ms. Bodie is going to give us a little bit of information, as well as Mr. Tucker, on, tell us a little bit about what non-counters means and how does that apply. We're going to start with Ms. Bodie.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. So the non-counter is what we would be for second season athletes. So if the second season student athlete was enrolled at an NJCAA member college for the 2021 academic year and was signed to an NJCAA letter of intent scholarship agreement for the 2021 academic year, the student may receive a scholarship at the same institution for the 21-22 academic year and not be a counter. The student athlete must be signed to an LOI. If they were to transfer to another school, they would be a counter. This only applies if they stay at the same institution. Also, when completing the LOIs, the program is set up, the LOI system is set up so you are allowed to submit additional student athletes outside of the allowable number for that sport. So that is not a concern when putting those LOIs in. What we ask you to do is you will submit, complete the letters of intent as you always do. And we just ask that in the top right corner, if you will just note that that student athlete is a non-counter, and just keep this on file in case you're audited. This just helps our office as well as your institution track the number of counters and non-counters for each sport.
Thank you. Troy, anything to add to the counters and non-counters part of the conversation?
No, I mean, we've really relied on Wanda and Brian for this, and I really appreciate their feedback. The committee was in agreement. We did meet the day before the board meeting, and we agreed with that recommendation to only utilize as counters the returning second season participation student athletes, very similar to the language we utilized this past year, just to stay consistent with the spring sports student athletes who were here in obviously the spring 20 semester for us.
And I want to point out Troy took over our eligibility committee August 1st. Former chair Carl Heinrich had the brunt of COVID-19 to get us started, and his group did a phenomenal job helping us last year. I want to thank Troy and his group for this year. Troy, off the top of your head, can you tell us all the members of your eligibility committee?
Yeah, I can go down through the group. Joel Bate, Marcy Henry, Dean Myrick, Nick Schrader, Mike Sadler. You're going to put me on the spot here to get, obviously Carl Heinrich serves with us as well. Jay Lee, the president out at Marcy's institution, and Dan Mason, Joanne Rogers, and Gary Huber.
Excellent. It's a good group of people that get things done. Now, the big question that everybody has is, what does this mean with the NCAA? What does this mean with the NAIA? Well, right now, the NCAA has given a blanket waiver to fall student athletes, just like we have. So they are not counting a year of participation. The same has been applied to winter student athletes. The NCAA has not made a ruling on spring student athletes yet. That is forthcoming. Discussions are taking place. NAIA has given a blanket waiver for the year. So again, understanding the upward and downward motion. So again, if a student athlete plays volleyball at an NCAA school this year, he or she can come back next year and play volleyball for us without counting a year participation. We accept the non-participation at their level. They will accept or adopt, or however you look at what our ruling is. They may have some different appeal processes that the student athlete will have to fill out paperwork for, but they will accept our blanket waiver, meaning John Doe could play this year, move on, still retains that year of eligibility. Also, they could have been a COVID freshman last year in a certain sport, are going to retain that year of eligibility as well. They will accept those. What we are still navigating with them, and I have meetings set up, is I am requesting relief from a student athlete transferring Division I towards a 60% rule. We do not know the outcome of that right now. There are meetings being set up with myself and the heads of the NCAA to talk about that. Just like us, they will go through a number of processes with their governance, with their divisional councils, with their president and their vice presidents to really review that. I can tell you they have been very accommodating, very friendly and informative and forthcoming on what they're doing and how they're doing it with us. And that's much appreciated. The same thing with the NAIA. They're going to adopt it. They're going to accept it. They will allow you to transfer in. Look at NCAA 2. You typically get 10 semesters to play 8. You have full-time semesters. We're going to have those discussions with the NCAA as well on, can we support the student athletes in another way? Will you give a guaranteed or another process to help us relieve them of those situations? So again, we know they'll accept the waivers, but we're going to have to ask for some relief on the 60% rule for Division I, the 5 semesters, the full-time semesters for Division II. Again, nobody's been here. We're all in this together. We're all standing on an island looking at each other, waiting for somebody to reach out and pull each other together. And that's what we're doing in these processes. So again, don't worry about them not accepting the waiver if your kid's playing the games. They're going to adopt the waiver. There may be paperwork they have to do on their end, just like in some of our hardship cases, we have paperwork. But on our end, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep up with the transfer waiver if they come back, how it's outlined if they played or didn't compete. Even if they played, it's a non-competition year for them in the winter and in the fall, as is now. So again, focus on understanding they're keeping their eligibility, no matter if they play in 1 game or 20 games of basketball, if they play in 2 baseball games or 22 baseball games. But if they're looking to go D1, staying on academic track is something we're still working with them on to get relief from. Last year, they didn't want to provide a lot of relief because they wanted to push the student to the academic performance level as possible. And that's what we stayed on track with. But again, we're having meetings to discuss that with them to see what kind of relief we can get. And it's very important to note that they will accept it. It's just how we work with them together to make sure our student athletes transfer. So that goes back to point 1. Advise your student athletes well. Advise them on all understanding. If they have aspirations and the ability to do certain things, make sure they're communicating with you, make sure they're staying on track. They're looking at all the different things, whether it's financial aid. A number of factors play into all of this. It's not a one case fits all. We wish it absolutely was, but it's not. And knowing this, Wanda, we had to kind of pull in legal advice here because we have some bylaws in place and kind of that, well, they didn't participate, but they did participate type of factor. And we're going to use football and volleyball as a couple examples here. So football player A plays at The Ohio State University this fall. He actually plays. It doesn't count as a year of eligibility or competition, but he plays in 5 football games. Season gets canceled. He cannot come back to the NJCAA and play a spring season. Okay, we have a bylaw that says you can't play for 2 different institutions in the same season. It's different and unique because this typically only applies to essentially basketball, in some cases wrestling, and a few of those winter sports. But our bylaw and our legal kind of evaluation says, even though it doesn't count as a year of eligibility, the bylaw still pertains to playing for 2 different teams in the same single season. So Wanda, can you give us a little kind of more information there?
Yes. So the bylaw we're referring to, it is in Article 5, Section 3C1B, which states student athletes may not participate in the same sport during the same academic year at 2 different colleges. So the question at hand is, can a student at school A, any division of any governing body for the fall semester or any part thereof, transfer to school B, NJCAA member college, for the spring semester or any part thereof and play the same sport? This is a statement from our legal counsel, and he said, based on his review, the answer to this question is no. Unless the Board of Regents intended to alter Article 5, Section 3C1B when the year of eligibility waiver was passed, it remains unaffected. Amending bylaws requires specific action, and those were not taken here. Moreover, when we look at the intent of the drafters of the bylaw, it seems competitive advantage was part of the reasoning behind the passing of the bylaw. Those issues remain unchanged. Just to further clarify, participation in any fraction of any official contest during the academic year shall constitute as one season of participation in that sport. So this has not changed. So even though it is not being counted as a season of eligibility in the fall at the NCAA or NAIA level, if they transfer to an NJCAA school in the spring, they cannot participate in that same sport during the same academic year.
So again, just a couple other points of emphasis and clarity. So normal situations, fall baseball practice takes place at a four-year school. That's not during your regular season. They still can transfer back to a NJCAA school and play in the spring. But if they played in one of the Power 5 conferences of football and played 4 or 5 games, they cannot transfer back to an NJCAA school and play this spring. If they were in, say, the CAA, which has their season scheduled for the spring, they could leave in the fall and come to us in the spring and be eligible because they did not play their official season in the fall as is. Same applies for basketball. If you get a student athlete that in basketball, men's or women's, they're starting their season right around December 1st, they play an official game, they cannot transfer a semester and play during the second semester with an NJCAA school. If they do not play, then technically they could transfer into the NJCAA second semester and be eligible since our season starts January 4th. Again, lots of what ifs, lots of crazy scenarios, but think about how it's always been with the dual season competition of playing in 2 places at once. Troy, Mick, anything you'd like to kind of add to that? It's certainly uncharted waters, but trying to navigate this clearly is what we want to make sure people understand.
The one thing that I would add, it's just to clarify, because I've had this question a few times over the last couple days. This is still only something for individuals to play 2 years. I've actually been approached by a few people through email and phone calls asking if a student athlete who was eligible could come back to play a 3rd year, and it is not. It is still this spring for only your 2nd year, obviously a 2 year instead, 2 years of eligibility. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear and out there because people are asking that question.
Thank you.
And to add to that, I think another reason, in addition to the letter of intent signing date of November 1st, it does give a great deal of time to educate our student athletes and our coaches and our administration about what can and can't be. And so anything that seems like it is gray area, just urge you to reach out to your regional directors and your Board of Regents members, and obviously the staff of the NJCAA to get a clear answer. So you're operating under the same understanding, and the student athlete knows exactly how to proceed for the spring semester.
Yeah, and as always, compliance at njcaa.org fields questions if they come up, especially while you're watching this or viewing this and you kind of wonder, scratching your head, will help me understand this. Like I said, feel free to shoot them to compliance at njcaa.org. But again, just understanding that all of this is pure chaos, but we're trying to do the best for our student athletes and our programs all at once. Looking ahead, now, are there other eligibility? How are you guys looking at this spring, Troy, from what was previously passed last year for this spring? Are there any other changes, or is everybody kind of comfortable where we are?
Well, right now, again, we met, as I mentioned, the day before the board meeting, and even during the board meeting, kind of brought up broached the conversation that we do have eligibility rules that are in place for spring 21. As it stands today, we feel very comfortable that those are the rules that we'll utilize for spring 21. Again, being the basic NJCAA eligibility, 12 with a 2.0, 24 with a 2.0 if you're a 2nd year participant. Please note there is some COVID relief if you were here in spring of 20 as a full-time student. There is some COVID relief in the rule book that is there. So I would advise ADs and coaches to look into that. For full-time students from spring of 20, they could utilize what we term a -6 for credit hours. But again, that would only be for students who would have been enrolled in spring of 20. But as of right now, we are staying status quo with the eligibility. I'm not sure, Marcy played a big part in this as well. I'm not sure if she's anything to add to that.
I believe you're correct, Troy, and that we do have set guidelines for spring of 21. And, if there are additional items that need to be looked at, our membership can certainly bring those forward for the eligibility committee to review. Additionally, we may be looking at fall sports of 21 and how do we manage those second season participants if their first time enrollment was in the spring of 21. So I'm sure as the eligibility committee convenes and reviews some of the concerns of the membership, there may be some additional relief that comes due to COVID.
Thank you, Marcy. And she kind of touched on where does this lead to? And the next question is, Troy, Wanda, Marcy, Mick, do you expect some kind of review and extra review for next fall and as we progress through these next few months of challenges with knowing student athletes are challenged, and all students are challenged, but what do you guys foresee kind of moving forward and just that process if people want to, make sure that Board of Regents has a input?
Well, the two things that I would add, and I think Marcy hit on it, is one, the eligibility committee is here to serve the membership. We'll review any proposals that are brought forward through the proper channels. Given the disruption, the challenges that our student athletes have faced this semester, I'm sure there's going to be some proposals brought forward, and we'll be happy to vet those and bring them back to the board. I would also mention that we do have the COVID Hardship Appeals Committee out there. That is something for student athletes and administrators to look to if you have a student athlete that you feel, due to COVID related issues, might not meet certain eligibility guidelines that are in place.
Thank you, sir. So kind of to recap again, we all understand that these are frustrating times. We're going to put the best interest of our student athletes first and foremost. We're going to keep the main thing, and that's our student athletes. If they can retain their eligibility and go forward, and that helps them at the next level, earn more degrees, get more time, whatever it may be, that's kind of the ultimate factor of decision making here. There's no right or wrong answer. I promise you, there's no right or wrong answer. There's a lot of various opinions. What's best? There's no way to answer all the questions. The best we can is to put our heads together, and I'm very proud of the group collectively for doing that the last couple of weeks of really evaluating that. Wanda, anything else you'd like to share in closing with the membership?
I don't believe I have anything further. They have covered it. Eligibility is still discussing everything as new things come forward, which is ongoing with the COVID situation. One situation I did want to add in regards to participation that we didn't really discuss is in football, that I've had the question is if they receive a red shirt, and that still applies the same. If they participated in games but were redshirted, they still participated, so they could not transfer in the spring and participate in football at an NJCAA school in the spring. I just wanted to clarify that because that was another question that we had.
Thank you.
I have. Thank you.
Marcy, is there anything else you'd like to share with the membership in regards to the discussions we've had?
I think this really sums up quite a bit of the discussion and hopefully provides information for our membership to move forward or ask additional questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tucker.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. And, as I've mentioned, the committee is here to serve the membership. And again, any proposals or thoughts that people have, we look forward to talking about those. And I do want to say, Dr. Parker, I did leave my good friend Darren Pannier off I went through my 10 members, and I want to make sure I get Darren there so I don't get a text from him tonight. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Troy. And Chairman McDaniel, anything else you'd like to share with the membership?
Well, I think the one thing we heard loud and clear when we were looking at, moving things from fall to spring and then redesigning schedules and championships and things like that. And then when we are at the present times with still being uncertain about what spring semester looks like, whether it was a coach, a parent, an administrator, somebody who was really familiar with our organization, they were just concerned about costing the student athletes anything. They didn't want to start up a season and then have to pause it or cancel it and then, cost them a season of participation by playing a couple of games or a handful of games. So that was always first and foremost. I think what this blanket coverage does is it adds a little bit of fuel to the tank of the schools in our organization that have been really hesitant to try to play in the spring. So now that we have this coverage and we know we're not going to cost a student athlete any part of their eligibility as far as participating in this year, the hope is definitely to get schools to give it a try. And that may mean greatly modifying schedules and reducing numbers of contests in anticipation of things having to pause once in a while. But I think this really benefits the organization because I've heard from many schools that maybe were reluctant to give it a try if there was no kind of a blanket statement. And now they're really considering putting those schedules together and as usual, providing the most opportunities for our student athletes. So it's good on a lot of levels.
Thank you for that. The last thing I'll leave everybody with is the other question I got is, do you think we'll have seasons? By golly, we're committed to having seasons. We're committed to having championships. We're going to stay the course, find ways to support you and our student athletes, the coaches. We have to do it in a safe environment. We have to do it in a way that everybody's comfortable. So we're constantly working on protocols and information. We're currently working on a piece for the website that will give you the updates in every state in which championships are scheduled to be hosted. We don't know what fans will look like. We don't know what certain dynamics will look like when it comes to next week or 2 weeks from now. We know that November, we're in pretty good shape in Iowa for cross country, but our next one isn't until March. So we get, 3 months to adjust and to continue to navigate these waters. So again, we appreciate all of you. And I want to thank you, Troy, Wanda, Marcy, and Mick for joining here today. And hopefully the membership can understand this decision and value the time to give some feedback and help explain it all. So thank you all very much for joining us.